I have a new projector in for testing today. It's the Elephas LED projector. This is also known as the GM60. They're identical. This one's just branded with that specific make. We get a remote. There's a figure of 8 power cable. This is the 3-pin UK version. Other regions will have different plugs. And we have the AV cable supplied here for connecting analog devices to the projector. You do get quite a decent chunky braided HDMI cable included, so you can attach things like Android boxes, laptops, anything that has a HDMI port. You could attach it directly to the projector. Also get a user guide provided too. Just take this out of the box. You can see it's quite a small unit if you compare it to the size of my hands. Looking at the top panel now, you'll see we have a brushed metal effect on 2 of them. It actually feels reasonably well built for the price point. We take off the lens cap, you can see the coating on the lens there. Now this wheel can move down to increase or reduce the height of the projector. It's quite a fine thread on that, so you just need to turn that around, and we have the brass tripod thread too, so you can mount this on a tripod if you want. On the side we have the headphone, the AV, 2 USB, SD and HDMI. Only one of these USB ports is data, the other one is for charging devices like phones or tablets, and on the back VGA and the infrared receiver for the remote. Right hand side we have the power, then we have the Keystone correction and the focus. So you just push those up and down to make the adjustment. You can see at the front one the lens has come out for the focusing. On the top panel we have 6 keys here, so you don't necessarily have to use the remote. You can completely control the projector via these at the top, so if you misplace that. We'll have a quick look at the remote. It's okay, it's slightly chunky, but it does the job. Some of the buttons are a bit small, but it's okay really for the price. You have some functions built into there, but not all of them. You have to go into the menus, and on the back here we take 2 AAA cells which aren't provided. This gives you a rundown on the specs and the file support. Note it says full format support for video files, but we'll come to that a bit later on. And this gives you some more details on the specifications, the Keystone correction, the power consumption and the projection distance. Looking at the user manual, it's actually pretty good. It goes through the unit and tells you all the specifics that you might need to know. It's quite well laid out and clear. There's the overview of the product here and the parts and the remote control and just general operation and how to use it. It's a pretty good manual. It's above average compared to some of the ones that I've seen, although it's quite a simple unit to work out how to use. Now powering this up, you'll see the LED light flashing there, and what I'm doing here is adjusting the focus. The minimum focus on this is a bit bigger than the spec. It's about 1.5 meters. That's what I found. So it's a bit longer than 1 meter. Your maximum projection distance will depend on the quality. And we're adjusting the Keystone now. You can see the angle. The only trouble with the Keystone adjustment is it can knock the top or bottom out of focus slightly, but it is a useful feature to have. Now running through the menus, you can see the 4 at the top. Movie, music, photo and text. You can scroll through those and then it will just launch you into a file browser so you can search for those files. It's very straightforward and simple. Now if you go into the main menu system, we'll go through the 4 different categories: pictures, sound. The first 2, and you can move up and down for the menus. There's a time as well, a sleep timer. And you have some additional options. There's a potential software update and factory defaults. Quite simple. There's not too many options, but you can adjust the important ones like the picture control and the contrast and the color balance. This shows you the input selection. So you have the 5 inputs here, from the RGB to the SD card, etc. And you'll see here I've just pressed the mute. On the left hand side icon comes up. And the file browser, pretty simple. Sometimes the thumbnails come up depending on the file type. They do for pictures, and sometimes they don't for some video files. Now here I've just playing a HD clip, but obviously the projector is limited to 800 by 480 WVGA, so it's downscaling the image, and I'm adjusting the sound output. Now To be fair, with the projector, the image quality is actually pretty good. The difference with this is obviously you're going to be getting less detail than the original file because of the resolution, but the contrast and colours are actually quite good at the default settings. If you wish to go into any navigation, you're going to have to bring up the menu bar at the bottom here. You can see you get options to do that. You don't have all of these controls on the remote. You have the basic skip and play and pause, etc. You also have the fast and slow motion as well. So you're going to have to make use of that. It would be better if they had a few more on the remote, but it's okay. And here I'm cycling through a few different color modes. You can go in manually and adjust these yourself. I actually find them pretty good on the default settings. But you can adjust the sharpness, the tint, the contrast, and the color saturation. And here is the color temperature. I would avoid going too high with the contrast because it can crush down the blacks and perhaps blow out the whites, but it's actually fairly good at the standard setting. But if you have any particular preference, you feel the image is a bit cool, you can go in and adjust that, warm it up a bit or cool it down. Now you can also browse for photos, and it has a sort of slideshow option there. You can see the animation moving from one picture to the next. Now obviously these files are significantly higher resolution, but it actually looks pretty good for pictures. Much will depend on your distance, your projection distance, and how far you're actually projecting the image in size. Now you do have some additional options that you can do with this as well. You can zoom in to the image too, which will show you that in a second. Colours and details are slightly contrasty out of the box. Depends really on the original image, but you might want to adjust it down a touch, but I find it looks pretty good. It's not as cooked as some that I've seen. Here we are just zooming in on the image. Now you don't have a ton of options with this, but it's just a basic sort of slideshow, but you can stop images, zoom in, twist them around as well. There's a rotation option too. It's basic, but it gets the job done. It's actually okay for pictures. As long as you don't need sort of ultra high details, it's not bad at all for pictures. The other formats with the text support is just basic text, and music is, as it says, just music file playback. Now with the sound, I found at the higher bass levels it can sometimes distort, but that's not something which is unusual. The sound output's actually okay for the projector. One problem I found is sometimes you'll see this screen, it just tries to load a file and it just freezes. I don't know why that is. It perhaps distracts a little bit. The file support isn't quite as universal as it says. Sometimes the files didn't play back. So that's really perhaps the major downside for me with the projector. It doesn't play back all the files, and it seemed to play back some fine. So it's a bit mixed with the support in that regard, but the price is quite good. The projection quality is also pretty good for a standard def projector. It's a WVGA, so obviously you'll want something for presentations a bit higher in terms of resolution and output, but for the money it's possibly a reasonable option for a first projector.